So to replace the resigned Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, Abe Fortas, the new Republican president, Richard Nixon, nominated first Clement Haynsworth Jr. He had been born in October 1912 and he passed away in November 1989, aged 77. He was born in Greenville in South Carolina, then received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Furman University in 1933 and Bachelor of Laws degree from Harvard Law School in 1936. And for most of the time from 1936 to 1957, he was privately practicing law in Greenville. Then US President Dwight Eisenhower nominated him to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. The United States Senate confirmed him quickly, and he became that circuit court's chief judge in 1964. In August 1969, President Nixon nominated him to be an Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Obviously, President Nixon wanted to shift the Supreme Court more to the right because Fortas had been a notably liberal judge. A coalition of Democrats, Rockefeller Republicans, liberal to moderate Republicans, named after then Governor of New York State Nelson Rockefeller, who interestingly enough had opposed Nixon for the Republican nomination both in 1960, although less actively, and in 1968 more actively. He had also unsuccessfully tried to stem the conservative Republican tide that carried Senator Barry Goldwater to that party's nomination in 1964. And the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Possibly this was in retaliation for the Republicans and conservative Democrats' rejection of Fortas as Chief Justice just the previous year in 1968. According to his opponents, Judge Haynsworth was pro-racial segregation and anti-labor, although privately one of Judge Hayworth's Democratic opponents said, either Haynsworth's or Carswell's Democratic opponent said, according to the late President Nixon, quoted in his autobiography or memoirs, RN, "This conflict of interest is so much jazz, we are against him for what he believes." Even Republican Senator Marlowe, reflecting the partisan divide over the nomination, Democratic U.S. Senator Philip Hart of Michigan claimed that Haynsworth's decisions on civil rights and labor management were unacceptable, while Republican Senator Marlowe Cook of Kentucky claimed that Haynsworth was being subjected to a character assassination that is unjustified and was a man of honesty and a man of integrity. He was also accused of ruling in cases in which he had a financial interest, although this claim was never proved. Later, he was termed a moderate who was in close outlook to John Paul Stevens, whom Nixon's successor as U.S. President Gerald Ford nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1975, and indeed he had a long career there. So in November 1969, 55 U.S. senators voted against Haynsworth's confirmation, 45 voted in favor. These 55 senators consisted of 38 Democrats and 17 Republicans, while the 45 who voted in favor of his confirmation were composed of 19 Democrats and 26 Republicans. So this case was not just a partisan one, but also one that divided both major parties in the United States Senate. And he was the first U.S. Supreme Court nominee to be defeated by the Senate since Judge John J. Parker, also of the Fourth Circuit Court, had been rejected in 1930. His rejection became an issue in the 1970 South Carolina gubernatorial election. James Edwards, an oral surgeon from Charleston, who was then the Republican chairman of South Carolina's 1st Congressional District, claimed that the Democratic candidate John West, the outgoing lieutenant governor, had opposed Haynsworth's confirmation. West denied this charge. West did defeat Watson, but in 1974, Edwards himself was narrowly elected as the first Republican governor of South Carolina since Reconstruction. At that time, the South Carolina governors could not serve consecutive terms. After being defeated by the U.S. Senate, Haynsworth remained on the Fourth Circuit in Greenville. He assumed senior status in April 1981 and retained it until his death, also in Greenville, in November 1989.